What's up, everyone? Roy here, and you are listening to the Clemenz with a Z podcast. Today's episode, we dive deep into another powerful story in our ongoing series, We Were in a Cult, where I get to interview former members of the ICOC as we make sense of our life in the church and out of the church. Joining me is Shari, a talented writer who shares her personal journey with me of being drawn into the ICOC. Sherry moved to Manhattan in her late 20s, excited to pursue her dreams, when a chance encounter on the subway led to an unexpected invitation that changed the course of her life. We'll explore how she got involved in the church, the impact it had on her, and her process of finding clarity, healing, and independence after leaving the ICOC. Through her unique story, we'll also touch on the broader themes of vulnerability, manipulation, and the subtle ways organizations can pull us into environments that we later struggle to break free from. This is a conversation about reclaiming one's identity and redefining faith. So glad you're here to listen. So let's get into it. All right, we are live. Hey, Sari.
How are you doing, Roy?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you
Good.
on. Glad
Very happy to be here.
to talk about church, your life, maybe get closer to the answer of we were in a cult.
We'll see, right?
Yeah. So let's jump right in. How did you get involved with the church?
Well, I was actually 27 when I was invited the first time. I had just moved to Manhattan.
Hmm.
I had been there about a month. I was an actor and writer. I'm still a writer. And I was I was on my way to an audition,
Hmm.
and the train was late, as it usually was. And this girl started a conversation with me. And I'm a very I love people. I love to collect experiences and meet new people and hear their stories. So, I just like engaged with her, and we found out that we lived like a block away from each other. And she was like, "Hey, come to a party at my house tonight." I'm like, "Oh yeah, great, absolutely." And she gave me her number, and then I wasn't feeling well later, so I called her, and she was like, "Oh no, you're not coming? What do you, you're not coming?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm not feeling great." And she's like, "Well, let's meet for lunch tomorrow." And she sounded so panicked that I was
Hmm.
like, "Well, that's weird." Of course, in retrospect, anybody that you've met and shows the least bit of friendliness, you're like, we gotta I gotta get them, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Hmm.
So the next day I met with her, and she brought a friend, which I thought was a little weird. And um she's like, "Oh, this friend reminds me so much of you." Yeah. We both had blonde hair at the time. That was about it. And I just thought they were the oddest. They were very odd, the both of them. But I like odd. So I was like, I'm
Hmm.
going with this. And then they asked if they could pray before the meal. And I thought, hey, that's cool. And then, before we even got the food, they were like, "We'd like to invite you to our church." And I was like, okay. And I was actually going through a very spiritual, I was in a searching phase. I did not think I was searching for God. I just knew I was searching for something. Um, and luckily for them, when I asked, "What kind of church is it?" They were like, "It's a non-denominational church. We don't really follow any of the, Catholic, anything. We just try to, live the Bible." And I was like, that sounds right, because if they had said it's a Christian church, there would have been like smoke as I
Hmm.
ran out the door, because I dealt with a couple of born agains before, and it was just a horrible experience. So they never said the word Christian. And I mean, I knew that it was, in the Christian realm, but the only thing I knew about the word Christian was born agains.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, yeah, I'll come. And my first service was at the Jacob Javits Center in in Manhattan, and there was like 3,000 people there. And I was
Yeah.
like, what have I stumbled into here? Um, but interestingly enough, when they started singing, I just started to cry because it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Like every single person
Yeah.
was singing, and they all knew the words, and it was like heaven on earth, honestly, because I came from a Catholic background where getting people to sing was like pulling teeth, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and I was just honestly transported, and I think that that never really went away. The singing together was always something that moved me moved me greatly. Um, so that was my start, and of course they immediately like zeroed in on me and wanted me to study the Bible, and I was a little taken aback. I was like, okay, because they were like, how about tomorrow? Like, well, I can't do tomorrow. How about the next day? And I was like, good Lord.
Yeah.
um but I eventually did, and that's kind of how the whole thing started. So
Yeah. It's it's interesting when I wonder back because you said the train was late, and
yeah.
I wonder if when they were talking about meeting you, if they would include like the train was late,
Oh yeah.
you know, because
Yeah.
for us, that
Yeah.
kind of thing is like
Yeah.
the only
Yeah.
word I can describe it, and this might be abrasive, it's just like it's almost like Christian porn.
Yep.
It's that, the story of,
Yep.
oh, the train was late and then I was there, but then she
Yep.
was there. And so it was God telling me,
Yeah.
God made this happen, you
Yep.
know?
It's so God. And I use that
Yep.
with air quotes because, I fell into that for many years of like just
Hmm.
assuming that God was behind every single thing. But I will say I did have an interesting experience a few days before I met them.
Huh?
I was standing in the park, in Central Park, waiting to get tickets for Shakespeare in the Park. So I was in a line of like 300 people, and I was with a friend, and some random woman who I have no idea who she is to this day walked in front of this line and opened her Bible and started reading 1 Corinthians 13 in a really loud voice. And I was raised Catholic. I never heard a scripture in my life, So,
Hmm. Yeah.
I really remember is like 299 people turned their back on her, and I turned towards her because I love the words, and also because I remember it like it was yesterday. I thought, I wish I had something I believed in enough to look foolish in front of other people,
Wow.
because I was so afraid of what people thought of me. Um, I had such terrible, even for someone who could be very extroverted, I had terrible social anxiety, and I just thought that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Obviously, I was the one person in that line who thought that, but so then a couple of days later, when I met them and they invited me, I was like, well, that's an interesting coincidence.
Yeah.
You
That
know,
is interesting.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you said you were Catholic.
yeah.
What was life like for you before being met? And also, like, what did you view? Like, if someone said God, what was your view of God before coming into the church?
You know, I the interesting thing is one of my earliest memories in my entire life. You have those memories that are just you have a couple of like the earliest memories that you can remember. One of the
Hmm.
earliest memories, my family, they were big movie buffs. So that's why I became a movie buff and a writer and stuff. And we were watching, I'm gonna betray my age, but this is like, the 60s, the late 60s, and they were watching Ben-Hur on
Oh
our
yeah.
old TV. I don't remember anything except one scene, and it's one of my first memories of my entire life. Is there were two women with leprosy, in a cave, and when Jesus was crucified, their leprosy went away and they came out into the light. And I just remember it made such an impression on me. I was probably four, 3 or 4.
Hmm.
Uh, but that was my first impression of Jesus, is like he's someone who loves and heals,
Hmm.
even when he's not even there, So I think that set me up for a lifetime of like sort of a pure admiration for Jesus, not the church, that's for sure. You know, uh, the church that I attended, they had there was no kind of it was all about the ritual, um, and I
Growing
tried.
up, it was.
Yeah, it
Growing
was
up,
all
it was.
about
Yeah.
it's all about the ritual. But my mom was a lover of God in her own way. She's very nutty, and she was excommunicated from the Catholic Church for marrying a divorced man
Oh no.
in the 50s. But she would still go, but she was not allowed to take communion. But it's funny because she never held it against God. And I think that kind of stuck with me. That sort of like God's cool, even if the church sucks, kind of thing.
What a fun perspective to have.
Yeah,
Great perspective in that
yeah,
idea. Like she was able to disseminate the fact that it wasn't necessarily God that was disappointed in her. It was people
right,
that were disappointed in her.
right.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think
No, no, I think it's a cool thing.
right away, that was the turning point for me in my this healing journey that I've been on,
Yeah,
was
yeah,
realizing that it wasn't God, it was people that did this.
yes.
Because I don't know if you felt this or you were part, but like when people were coming down on you for whatever it was that you were doing, there was this feeling of, no, God feels this.
Mm-hmm,
God is seeing me as this
mm-hmm,
person, or,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
God is mad because I chose to go to this Dave Matthews Band concert on a Wednesday night instead of going to church. But really,
Yeah,
had nothing to do with God. It was all these people. And
yeah,
so like that made everything I was feeling smaller,
yeah,
in the
yeah.
sense that like this was something that I could move past. This is something I could go through now because I could
Mm-hmm.
like disassociate from all of these, the creator of the universe looking down on me
Yeah, yeah,
in judgment. So that's really
yeah.
awesome that your mom was able to do that, but then in turn you were able to see that as well.
Yeah, and it was never anything necessarily spoken. It was just she's a really loving and fun person, and she doesn't judge people, and so it set me up really nicely for a good perspective of
Hmm.
of God, which is why I pushed back so hard at some of the dogma when I first came around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it. So you go to church, you're moved by the singing, which I
Hmm.
always felt the same thing. I always felt our singing was better than what I would see at like my relatives' churches, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you begin to study the Bible. What was it about it that was like, I no, I want to study the Bible. I want to be a part of this.
I, you know, I didn't really know much about the Bible, and I was
Yeah.
like, I can't really judge it until I actually read it. And they were very aggressive.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that we'll talk about is my conversion experience was very unpleasant, in many, many ways. Uh, and something that I didn't even something that I had sort of like put in the back of my mind, how bad it was, until much later when I
Hmm.
realized that was abuse. Like that was bullying. That wasn't,
Hmm.
but I sort of did this thing where I was able to separate, where I was like, yeah, I can kind of see that they're bullying me. But I still do love God. So maybe I can figure this out, even though, um, uh, there seems to be a huge agenda here. Like
Hmm.
I could feel the agenda. I wouldn't have been able to say that word probably at the time, but I definitely felt it. There were a lot of things I felt that I've only really recently been able to name. Um, that I was just like, oh, this is just not right.
Hmm.
And I actually, it's funny, I actually kept a journal during my studies. So I do have one line that I have to read because it amuses me now that I was that perceptive, even at that time. Do you want to hear it?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Definitely.
It's just one line, but I just thought it was really funny. Wait, I'm going to put my old lady glasses on here. Um, this is 1990. Okay. I feel like the church is a continual membership drive for the kingdom. There's a certain smugness to them. We are special. We alone follow the ways of the Bible. Oh, yay for us that I just distrust. Jesus hung out with sinners, prostitutes, politicians, crooks. He judged no one, but they judge continuously. Yep. So
First
I
off,
I yeah,
good on you for keeping the journal.
yeah.
Um, I had my journal from when I was studying the Bible up until about 5 years ago when I burned it.
Yes, that's right.
Um,
You burned it ceremony in a ceremony, right?
yeah,
Hmm.
I burn my journals every couple of years. I think it's very freeing. There's only two or three that I've ever kept.
Yeah.
One of it was around the time of meeting my wife, and then the other was when my like kid was born, just around there. Those are the only
Yeah.
other two that I have kept. But what an interesting thing for you to see and write down in the beginning, because
Hmm.
because even though you saw that, you still became a part of the
Yeah.
church and a disciple.
Yeah.
But then the second thing is agenda, because for me, I was always surprised that people didn't see the agenda,
Hmm. Hmm.
because we did so many things to just get people to come to church.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And like everything was like a marketing strategy or a tool to get you in the door.
Yeah.
And most churches do that. That's not a like, oh
Right.
my gosh, I can't believe you did this. Like a lot of churches, let's have a trunk or treat, let's have a cookout, let's have this, let's do a sports day, let's
Yeah.
do these. And it's interesting that people didn't see that,
Hmm. I think
you know.
so. Yeah. But it was the agenda that messed me up, honestly.
Mhm.
I could never lose the feeling that I had an agenda with people. And I wanted to love people just for who they were
Yeah.
desperately. I would
Hmm.
pray about it all the time. But as soon as I was with someone, I could feel the agenda creeping up. And it made me weird,
Hmm.
and I would try to name it so that I would be like, this is going to sound like I have an agenda. I would literally say stuff like that, and it probably is, but I actually believe this. So there's the only way I could deal with it because it would eat at me. Um,
Yeah, and it was almost like you just couldn't have anyone in your life to just be in your life.
yep.
It was either they're in your life to become a member,
Yeah.
or they're in your life to keep you a member,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
always the mission, it was always this stuff. And for me, I've always loved people, and I'm always interested in all walks of life. That's probably because of my parents. My parents were very open
Yeah.
with their house, with their dinner table, with who was it's like everyone had a seat at my parents' table.
Yeah.
Right,
Yep.
that's from the earliest memory of my life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I just was always meeting people, and it was always this thing of like I struggled because I didn't want to bring up the church,
Yep.
because I
Yep.
didn't want to run them away. And
Yeah.
also I was like, they're, why can't my our friendship just be the thing?
Hmm.
And who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe they'll come to church. Who know? Maybe they won't. But
Yeah.
there's always this struggle for me was internal of like, if I don't get them to church, then what does that say about me? And did I,
Hmm.
miss out on opportunity? So
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Well, it's funny. I used to like I I was a big my friend Josette and I talk about it all the time. We were the most annoying people in the world. Honestly, nobody wanted to disciple us because we were
Mhm.
so difficult. We just push back on everything.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, I remember saying, "Listen, Jesus healed people without any expectation, right?
Yeah.
Like you see him healing people, and you don't see those people around when he was just loving them. That's the way I want to be. I cannot do this whole like membership drive thing. I'm
Hmm.
horrible. I'm a horrible salesperson. Um, and even for something I believe in, I'm a horrible salesperson because I hate having an agenda.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so it was miserable. And I also in the studies, I'm a writer, right? And
Hmm.
I read like thousands and thousands of both. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that's just the way my brain works.
Yeah.
So the word study, I think was the probably the first study. And I was like, what is this? We're like jumping around, and when we got to the scripture about all scripture is God breathed, like in my mind, I could feel like, was the New Testament even like put together when this was written? How can this be referring to the whole Bible? It wasn't even put together, So I was already the logic was killing me, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And now I know it's like the proof texting, selective
Hmm.
literalism. I know all the terminology. I didn't know the terminology then, but I knew that it bothered me.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew that it bothered me that at the end of the study, they were like, "So are you ready to take the Bible as your standard?" I'm like, "Are you people freaking nuts?" You know, I I've read three things in this. No.
I need, guys, I need a little bit more time. Just let me.
I'm like, I'd like to read this if this is going to be my standard. And their thing was kind of like, well, you don't need to read all of it, to know that it can be I'm like, yes, I do.
Yeah, you have to sit
So
with it. Hmm.
yeah, so I definitely made it. I read, I read it. I read it
Yeah.
you know, from cover to cover. Um, and I loved so much of it, and I hated so much of it. And I was just like, God seemed like not bipolar, but like octopolar. It
Hmm.
was like all over the place. And now I know, of course, that like what I believe is that the Bible is not univocal. I believe it's multivocal, you know, um, and that it's a lot of different people's ideas of God. Uh, but um, in the time and places that they were, which makes, if you're trying to put it together as one piece, it makes God sound, kind of all over the place. And
Kind of schizophrenic.
because schizophrenic, right? And also, when you subscribe to this sort of God, you have this feeling all the time that you're not safe, because in one page God is telling you how much he loves you, and the next page he's striking you dead because you sold your field and kept back some of the money. You know, um, I and I grew up. My father died when I was 16, but he was. We all think that he was probably bipolar. He was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? So
Yeah.
this was the way that I was set up, and in my life. And they'd say that saying of like, when you unhealed people hear with their triggers, not with their
Hmm.
ears, you know. So a lot of things are very triggering to me for my unhealed parts, but definitely the the sense that God was like my father, like you didn't know who was coming through the door at any given time. Was it the nice guy or the vicious guy? You know,
Wow.
and you know, and honestly, that's kind of the way the church was too, at
Yeah,
least for the beginning, right?
it's
Like you could,
yeah.
yeah.
I just was going to say it's interesting how you use like you view God almost in the way that you view your dad,
Hmm.
and in a lot of ways that's what we do.
Hmm.
There's a author, Richard Rohr. I don't know
Oh,
if
I
you've
love
heard of.
Richard. Love
Yeah.
Richard Rohr.
So
Yeah.
one of his things is he talks about how we view God as we view our parents. And so if we
Hmm.
had a loving parent, then
Hmm.
God is loving. If you've
Hmm.
had an abusive parent, God is abusive.
Hmm.
And so here you're saying you had a bipolar father, like a Dr.
Hmm.
Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and you're
Hmm.
viewing God as a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's
Hmm.
interesting because, and the Bible is like, you have the Old Testament where God is killing all of these people, but then you have
Yeah.
Jesus who's loving everybody. And,
Yep.
when it comes to the Bible, because there's this part of me that was like, I grew up in the church. So this was what it was. And so you hear all scriptures God breathed, and they tell you that God, he essentially wrote the Bible, quote unquote. Like
Yeah.
it was people's hands, but God wrote the Bible. And for me, that was like, that's weird, but I don't have the strength to go
Hmm.
against that. I just have to believe it. And you take
Hmm.
15 minutes and research the Bible, you see how many authors of the Bible there were. I mean, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all written by other people.
Yep.
There's other books of the Bible where it says it's written by Paul, and then there's people that say it wasn't written by Paul. And so you don't,
Yeah.
it's like I don't think that knowing that there is different authors is a problem per se.
Yeah.
I just think that we have to be honest when we look at the Bible that way,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
I think so too. And that's what I felt from the very beginning, but I didn't know how to name it, you know.
Hmm.
And since we weren't allowed to read anything outside of,
Oh yeah. Hmm.
the DPI stuff, of course
Man,
I did sneak some spiritual pornography here and there. But not,
mine was Rob Bell books.
oh my gosh, I love Rob Bell.
Yeah,
Um,
they told me be careful if you're going to read Rob Bell.
be careful. Yep. Yep. I got told be careful if you're reading C.S. Lewis. Can you believe
Oh
that?
yeah. Hmm.
Because C.S. Lewis, this is what I was told in my study. C.S. Lewis was not a Christian, not a real Christian. This is what this woman told me, because he wasn't part of our church and didn't believe in baptism for the forgiveness
You
of
know,
sins.
how
Yeah,
smug of us. I'm really glad you said
so
the word
smug.
smug. And
Yeah,
I can't hear the word smug without laughing because I think of South Park immediately
yeah.
because that's what they used for Prius owners. They're so smug they smell their own farts. And so I'm glad that I've gotten to insert a South Park quote in here, but
It's always a good thing to be able to put a little
yeah, but like
South Park in.
how dare you tell someone that someone is not a Christian because they weren't a part of our church? And I
Oh,
mean, have you spend any time in his books and it's
yeah,
amazing. My
yeah.
my favorite book by him is The Great Divorce,
Mm-hmm.
about the guy who goes to heaven,
Mm-hmm.
or he's
Mine,
in purgatory, I guess, or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah. Mine was the problem of pain.
Yep.
That was
Hmm.
my favorite. So I read a lot of C.S. Lewis on the side, and I was even really reading Khalil Gibran, which I found to be the
Jeez.
prophet. And I was like, this sounds honestly in some ways better to me than but I could never say that. So
Yeah.
I always struggled without being able to name it, with this whole thing about like God was the same person all the way through the scriptures.
Yeah.
I just can't, then God's schizophrenic, kind of thing. And that sense of, yeah, that sense of, oh my gosh, that arrogance. It was so horrible. to
Mhm.
me. Um, I just, oh, uh,
Yeah, and
do you allow cursing on your,
you can
uh,
curse. I've cursed numerous times. Sometimes that's the best way to
yeah.
talk about religion is by cursing through it.
Honestly, I read something recently and I was trying to find it and I couldn't remember. It was quoted by somebody. It's a book called Asshole.
Hmm.
And it defines asshole as someone who has a sense of entitlement so deep that they cannot be criticized or critiqued in any way, And that's honestly, that's what I felt like I became,
Yeah, we
when I started doing that. I was like, oh, I feel like such an asshole most of the time.
and
Uh,
that's what's so powerful and dangerous
yeah,
about the Bible and about how you approach it. Because you can read the Bible and get this sense of power and arrogance about yourself to where like, because I know for us that word persecution was thrown
yeah,
around a lot. Like we're
a
going to be
lot.
persecuted
Yeah.
just like Jesus was. I was even in a church 2 weeks ago when the preacher was up there talking. It wasn't a part of the ICOC. It's this project I'm working on where but he was telling these people, he's like, yeah, if you are believing in God, you're going to be persecuted. And so any critique, any pushback, anything, we,
Is
by
yeah,
the way the Bible is presented and the way we read it, are going to perceive it as persecution,
yeah,
not anything that we really need to listen to or take to heart, which is
yeah.
that's an incredibly dangerous place to be.
It's a very dangerous place to be. Uh, and you can feel it when you're doing it, but it's hard to name. Um, but
Yeah.
it
Mhm.
that's that I definitely felt that a lot, even when I was at my most. I'm using this word very loosely. At my most brainwashed
Yeah.
um, within the church, um, I could feel that sort of like this is gross what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
But then we were
S-
told, but then your autonomy is really taken away because
mhm.
anything you feel that's in opposition to what how the scriptures are being interpreted is either your emotions or the devil or your heart, which can't be trusted, or
Yeah.
and it makes you crazy, you know. And
It
I
doesn't.
thank
Mhm.
I just thank God that somewhere in the back of my mind I had a back door. Like my I know now that I call it my critical thinking back door.
Mhm.
At the time, I just knew that if I didn't keep a part of my brain outside of this experience, I would never be able to tell if it was right or not. So I always kept a
Yeah.
little part of my brain outside going, I don't know about this. This does not feel right.
Mhm.
And I thank God for that because even at my most like I'm all in, there was like 1% of my brain was like, just be careful, be careful.
And here's what's weird about all this is because as you're talking and sharing these things, scriptures are coming to my head to
Mm-hmm.
like tell like the wisdom of God is higher, like God's thinking is higher than our thinking. But even
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioning the tether, there's this old part of me that's like, well, you weren't all in, and God knew that. Like,
Yeah.
it's just weird how
Yeah.
programmed, and it goes back to how because
Yeah.
how you use the Bible is you've got to be careful,
Yeah.
because I think having a tether is great because in a lot of ways you need a tether to the solid ground at some point in
Yeah.
your life because you can't spend we can't spend all our day in the clouds
Right.
with stuff. We have to be able to come back down to real life to
Yeah.
to exist and to be. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like fighting it. It's weird that this is coming up. Like I want to like I not attack you, but per se, but just be like it's that old ICOC kind of thing
Yep.
of like, no, this is why you didn't get it. This is why it was there, and this is why you didn't see it right.
Yep. Yep.
God, it's
And yes,
bananas.
I know, and I feel you right now with that
Yeah. Hmm.
because for the first 2 years that I was a Christian, um, I was told, I mean, countless times, it's because your emotions are your God. Um, you idolize your emotions. I would get lectured. Um, is why are you crying about this? Because I'd get so angry that I would cry. Why are you crying about this? You know what? You worship your emotions. That's what your problem is. Um, and I was so frustrating. And then finally, I kind of gave in at a certain point after like 2 years of misery, during which I was clinically depressed. I was clinically depressed when I came into the church, and I feel like somebody should have picked up on that. But it was 1990.
There's
It's a different time.
and there was no
Um,
space for stuff like that in our church.
no,
We
no,
didn't have language or tools for any of that.
no. I would just cry and cry and cry during the studies because the combination of a genuine love for God and Jesus, which I still have, plus the shaming was so
Mhm.
intense. And I'm a very like direct person, so I've gone back to all the people. I think I've only missed like one person where gone back and said, "This is what you did," and the, I'm saying across the board, every single person has apologized. So the woman who studied with me, I tracked her down. She's not part of the church anymore, and I said, "You bullied me." Um, you know, she would point her finger in my face and be like, "The Bible says you're supposed to be cut to the heart. Why are you not cut to the heart? And what's wrong with you? And how dare you?" I mean, it was really bad. Uh, and then she would be really sweet and really kind. And so it's that whole like schizophrenic thing again. And I didn't know who I was going to get. So I just kind of at a certain point, after 2 years of fighting back after I was baptized, I was like, it's me. I'm just not sold out. So I restudied and got rebaptized 2 years in.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
want to
Sorry.
go
I know I'm
back.
talking a lot.
It's okay. It's okay because this is how this goes. Um, it always goes back to you. You are always the problem, and that's what church does to us. You are always the problem. You are always the one that doesn't get it. You are always the one that's not seeing it. You need to pray about it to fix yourself so that you can see it the way
Mm-hmm.
God sees it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so fucked up about that is not changing so that you see the way God sees it, so you see the way the person sees it.
Yeah.
So, but I want to go back to the studying the Bible
Mm-hmm.
because you had mentioned it was this, you're kind of giving us, you were shamed, the finger pointing, all of this stuff. Why stay in it
Mm-hmm.
if it was getting, why do this
Yeah.
if you're being berated the way you were?
Yeah.
Is the question I have.
Partly because it was kind of up and down. Like I
Uh-huh.
said, at times they could be very sweet, and I really did believe that I wanted to find God. So that was part of it, and part of it was I had um I'd had some things happen to me before I started studying that not happened to me. Things that I had done that I was very ashamed about because
Gotcha.
I was one of those people in life. It's like I always had a really high standard for myself, a very high moral standard for myself that was not really attached to the church. It was just kind of who I was, and I'm sure it drifted into self-righteousness more often than not. But I had done a couple of things in the 2 years prior that I felt were very cruel and beneath me, I guess I would say. So that makes it sound very self-righteous, but like things that I'd done that I was like, that's just not who I am. And so it, it, it was in sort of a bind. It was like God had me in a place where I was finally dealing with some of that. but they had me in a place where they weaponized that
Mm.
against me. And I don't think, I really do believe this. I don't think it was intentional. I think that they thought they were breaking people was what was right. You're supposed to break people. So they were on a mission to break me because they thought I was arrogant. And I'm sure I was in many ways, but um, but at the same time, it was like it was their job to level me. Um, and they did a really good job of
Hmm.
it. Um, and the reason I finally figured it out, this is really interesting. You know how you can just bury things? A couple of years ago, I was speaking at a camp, and I used to tell these stories, and I would chuckle because I'm a comedy writer, right? So I would chuckle about like all these things that were done to me in the church that were, you know, well, it was not the best, but I really
Yeah.
loved God, so I stuck around. So I was speaking to a group of teenagers and a a decent amount of leaders, and I said, I knew that I was doing it for Jesus and not for people because I didn't like the people at all. And when on my last, I guess it was counting the cost, though I don't remember. I was sobbing hysterically because I mean, beyond terrified, beyond terrified. I was like,
Why?
I can't do this. I was just terrified. I was like, I cannot do this. I cannot be what you want me to be. I can't do Christianity this way. I mean, I was paralyzed with fear and I said, I'm so sorry, I just can't. And the woman who was studying with me looked at me. She said, if you walk out that door, you're going straight to hell. So I told this story as I was
Yeah.
telling it like it was a joke. And nobody took it like a joke. If you could have seen the looks on the faces of those kids and those leaders, like they were all like, and I suddenly realized I have been making excuses and making light of this for so long, that then all of a sudden all these memories came rushing in of like the finger in the face and the what's wrong with you, you are, just the bullying that I endured, that I'd kind of just stuffed, you know it all came flooding back to me like a recovered memory or something, and
Yeah.
it was in a place where I was already really struggling with a bunch of stuff within the way the church taught things. And I was like, okay, now be careful. Maybe did it really happen like that? Are you exaggerating? And also don't use it as an excuse to like blast back, and don't use it as an excuse. Listen, I don't want to jump from one fundamentalism to another, right? I was
Hmm.
already a fundamentalist. I don't want to be a fundamentalist against the church, right? Because it was a mixed bag. Um, but it was bad. It was really bad.
Yeah.
And that's when I sought out the woman, and she apologized profusely and basically said we were under so much pressure to baptize, and I had no business being in the position that I was in. And I'm
It's
really sorry.
interesting. It's interesting how people from the outside will hear that and be shocked to their core.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what? What? No. What? And then I'm just like, oh yeah, no, that tracks.
Yeah,
That's normal. That's how we
that
talked
was
about. I mean,
daily life.
you know, I process a lot of what I've gone through humor as well. Like,
Yeah.
I definitely make jokes through my pain.
Mm-hmm.
It helps me get through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, so she said you're going to hell if you walk out that door, and was that when you decided, well, I don't want to go to hell, so I should probably get baptized.
No, I she finally let up on me,
Okay.
and said, just think about it, pray about it. Which I, of course, like went, and I think I cried like straight for 2 days. I made myself sick. I was crying so hard. I
Yeah.
told you I was clinically depressed. What I really needed
Yeah.
was medication. Honestly, you
But you
know,
got a baptism instead.
I did get a
I'm sorry.
baptism
I'm
instead.
sorry. See, there it goes. Like my
I know,
finding cute,
I know, no. It's
Um,
funny that you say the thing about the humor because there was a group of us who used to write funny skits about
uh-huh.
the weird church culture. That was how
Yeah.
we did. That's how we dealt with it, and we would perform them, and people would laugh about how weird we were. And I was like, "Yeah, we're really weird."
I mean, look at the Book of Mormon. Like that Broadway play is hilarious.
It's right on
And
target.
and they're talking about some stuff that is pretty wild at the
Yes,
same time.
yes.
And you think about, man, two South Park reference. I mean, the creators, oh my gosh, this is wild. This is amazing. But like in a lot of ways, like humor, I think, gets people to listen,
Yeah.
and so
Yes,
if you could,
in a way that you can't get there with just like straight talk because people shut
yeah,
down.
that's why
Yeah,
comedians are so great
yeah,
because it gets you to laugh about this incredibly fucked up thing.
yeah,
And
yep,
then you can like process it a little bit.
yeah.
But I digress a little bit because I want to go back to so you get baptized,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I was going to say, and then all is well, because that's usually what I say next time. Oh, okay, so everything was bright and shiny and sunny, but then you did tell me that it wasn't that way, and so there was just 2 years of
Just
frustration.
torment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, my friend Josette and my friend Mary and my friend Linda, they were kind of like I'm not going to say last names, but they honestly saved my sanity
Hmm.
because Josette was just like as pushbacky as I was. Linda was the calming. She had this very calming voice, and she'd be like, "Well, you have a point. Here, let's think about this, right?" But I would like scream and cry and be so um, uh, angry, and she kind of uh, got me through it. So I will say, as most people on this say, that the best part of the church was the people.
Hmm.
Um, that the friendships that I have are so deep and so real. And I love these people so much, and I'm still very close with
And that's
with
awesome.
all of them. And that is really a gift from God.
Yeah, and it's for a lot of us, it's luck that we had these people because for
Yep.
every person like you and for me, I have there's people that did not, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
it's like the people were the best and they were the worst
And the worst. Yep.
at the same time. And I don't want to minimize what you just said because it is incredibly powerful because I'm where I am today because of the support group I had in it because
Yep.
I had people that I was seen and heard. And I
Yes.
think if there's a thing that gets you through this thing, that's kind of like is linchpin the right word, or it's the thing that will really get you through it?
Mm,
It
yeah.
is support,
Yeah.
and it is the feeling that you have a home, the feeling that you have someone to talk to, the feeling that you can be honest,
Yes.
that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Because if you don't have that, then those are the people those are the stories that are the hardest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so what was it about those first 2 years, one, that was so challenging for you, and then two, made you want to get re-baptized, which is again a thing that I think is surprising for other people, but not for me. And for
Nope.
people in this, re-baptism is definitely something that
Yep.
is normal for us.
Yep. Some people got baptized 3, 4 times, you know.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, well, partly it was just like I said, I couldn't name it, but I couldn't stand the selective literalism, you know,
Yeah.
the way I could not stand the way that we used the Bible. I found the Bible to be a really beautiful piece of, it's a library, as some would say, it's a library, and some of the books are gorgeous, and some are just really troubling, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I was just like, I would get so worked up over things like when Uzzah touches the ark and he's struck dead by
Yeah.
God.
Hmm.
It says he reached out his hand to steady it, and he was struck dead by God. Um, and I was like, he was completely innocent. This is what I would argue about. He was completely innocent. He's even trying to help, right?
Yeah.
And he's struck dead by God, and there was always an explanation. There was always and then finally they'd get to the point where they'd be like, just stop, just accept it, you know,
Hmm.
um, kind of thing. And I just couldn't, and it would just rip me up in inside. Uh, and but at the same time, there was this other narrative of I'm the problem.
Hmm.
I'm the problem. I'm not really committed. Uh, and those two narratives would run side by side. And I finally just gave in to the it's me. It's because I'm not really committed. And
Yeah.
underlying all of this to this day is a true love for God and true love and admiration for Jesus. Um, so if this is the only church, which I never believed, but if this is a church that really is striving, then where am I going to go? Where am I going to go? These are my friends now.
Yeah.
This is where, and it's like I saw how people were treated who left the church. The woman who met me a month after I got baptized, she left the church in the middle of the night. She moved out because she couldn't handle um, the uh, she couldn't handle what she was about to be attacked with, and she moved in with a guy that she had met. And I remember them telling me, like, taking my hands and being like, you know, she's done this thing. And we went to
Hmm.
see her, and we didn't hug her because the Bible says you don't touch even the clothes of the people who have done these things are tainted. And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, are you people freaking nuts? What is wrong with you? It's like, that is the grossest thing I've ever heard, And I'm like, why? Sometimes I get really mad at myself. I'm like, why didn't I just leave? Why didn't I just leave when I knew so often that this was really like, I don't know. I have all these thoughts. Again, I was clinically depressed, right? And
Hmm.
a few years later, I would go on medication, and that helped a lot, you know. But I think part of it was, you carry these these narratives and these hurts with you. My family was so fractured, and I was such the peacekeeper.
Hmm.
Like I was adulting before that was even a thing. I was constantly adulting in my family, trying to hold everybody together. And what I longed for was a group, a family. I longed for a family. I longed for a family where everybody loved each other, listened, and really strove to just stay together, even in when things were bad. Right. And so I just carried all of that into the church. And I was like, yeah, but we love each other. These are my friends. Somehow we could fix this.
Yeah.
I guess that was
Hmm.
part of it. you
As
know.
a thread that you hear a lot with people is that searching for a family,
Hmm.
the community gave you something. For a lot of us, it gave us meaning, it gave us support, it gave us all this stuff. And
Hmm.
like what happened with the lady when people left, it was like they died. You were
Yeah.
not going to see them, and you knew that where they were going to end up was hell.
Yeah.
And so you
Yeah.
didn't want to be that person. You didn't want to lose any of this.
Yeah. And I just was not strong enough,
Yeah.
honestly. I was not strong enough. I was a very,
Mhm.
I was a very, broken person in a lot of ways. And I just couldn't, and is it okay if I bring up my main thing that's I struggled with the entire time? Um,
Sure. I was
uh,
going to ask real quick before because I wanted to not lose this thing. I hope this
yeah,
was it so the realization that you were the problem was what got you to be rebaptized?
yes. The
Okay.
realization that I was the problem. And then I just tried to
Got
confess
it.
every single thing that I could, and
Yeah.
I just wanted to serve. I just wanted to serve God
Yeah.
and be all in.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
you know. So the second baptism, I still felt the same afterwards. But at least I knew, like in my mind, it's like at least I knew that I was committed and I was going to figure this out.
Yeah,
Um,
and people probably were like, "Amen.
oh yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
You need to this is great. It's so
hmm,
awesome." They probably made a big speech about your heart and your wisdom and
yeah,
ability to do this again and to make up for whatever it was,
yeah,
so
yeah.
cool.
And I
Hmm.
feel for them because I did all the same things to
Hmm.
other people. You know, I've tried to hunt down all the people that I know that I said ridiculous things to and hurtful things, and the people that I bullied. I'm sure there was more people, and if anybody's listening to this, please call me because I owe you an apology. Um,
Yeah.
you know, um, but it was just that's the frame of mind uh, that we were in. But the main thing that okay, so the main thing that I struggled with from the very beginning, and the thing that I never was able to resolve for 32 years that I was in the church, was when I was studying and they said that being gay was a sin.
Hmm.
Um, and I was like, what? I
Yeah.
remember it. I was in the theater. I grew up with gay kids. I saw what people had gone through, you know. And I was like, I will never believe that. Um, and but it was part and parcel of if I didn't believe that, then I was standing against God. Um, and I pushed back so hard on that. And then I would get so angry at their responses, which were so stupid, honestly. So stupid, so uninformed, so derogatory,
Yeah.
so simplistic. Um, that would make me so angry that I literally couldn't speak and I would just pour tears. Because it was just so I just couldn't believe it. And I'm thinking about all of my gay friends. I was living with a, one of my friends who was gay at the time that I was studying, and one of my best friends who had just gone through, I mean, hell, hell on earth with conversion therapy and everything, uh, shock treatments to try to not be gay. I was like, you're going to tell me that God looks at those people and says, you know what? If you don't stop this, you're going straight. It just made me so upset,
Hmm.
and I despise the fact that I gave in to it, though I didn't really give in. Honestly, when I was about to get baptized, I was like, God, this is the one thing I don't believe. But if it's true, you're just going to have to convince me. So I did keep that sort of in my back pocket. I was like, I just don't believe this. But when you didn't believe something, you were taught to pray harder. Um, just accept it. God knows higher than we do. God sees the big picture. All those things that box you in, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um,
It's
yeah,
it's
but then,
that's the thing. I think in the same way I didn't have the strength to speak up too much about it. I just stayed quiet
hmm
with my beliefs. And that was mainly because of how it was in my sin and repentance study. Um, I remember having, in the sin and repentance study, you write down all your sins, you write down all your
hmm
terrible things that you did, or that the all of that, and you're supposed to talk about it, right?
hmm hmm
And I remember saying, like, this one time I thought this one boy looked attractive,
hmm
as and so it was the wildest thing to see the reactions of the people
hmm
in the group, all of the men. Automatically, it's like alarms went off
hmm
and everyone
hmm
got scared and everyone was like, didn't know what to say. And this one guy was like, I mean, are you, does this mean you're, and I was like, in my head, I'm like, I guess not. I'm not going to talk about this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because I do think, my perception of a lot of things is, it's not so either or,
Yes.
which our understanding of anything in religion is either or. You're
Yes.
either gay
The
or you're straight.
dualism. Yeah.
You're either in or you're out. You're going to heaven or hell. It's either God or Satan. It's like that's
Yep.
just what it is. And
Yep.
attraction is like a spectrum
Yeah.
in some ways,
Yeah.
because I'm trying to choose my words very carefully because but like that was the view that I understood. I was like, murder sucks, but being gay is worse. Like
Yep.
that was what I grew up
Yep.
believing.
Yep.
And it never made sense to me because of the representations of what I was seeing outside the church didn't line up. Because if
Yeah.
I was, I worked with people that were gay and lesbians, and they were
hmm
kind, they were caring, they were sweet, they were loving. And I'm like, these people, but that's like that with everything about our
With
church. Like
everything.
my
Yep.
grandparents are going to hell. That doesn't make sense to me either because
Yep.
my grandparents are the same or like, and so it just was always this interesting
Yep.
struggle because, and I was silent about it. And it's
hmm
fucked up that I was silent about it.
Oh,
And at the same time, I
yeah.
didn't have,
Oh,
we don't have the strength or the words to stand up again because once again, I wasn't at the point where I could believe that this was anything other than God. So me standing
yeah.
up and saying being gay is wrong or being gay is not wrong is me saying that to the creator of everything.
Right.
And like, how do you say that
Right.
as
How
a
do you say?
19-year-old boy who's done nothing else than the
Right.
church?
Yeah.
Or for you just want to be a part of this. You want to please God, you
Yep.
know?
Yep. And I also, it's interesting. It's like I will question my own perceptions to a fault.
Hmm.
It's partly humility and partly, I don't know what the other thing might be, but it's partly humility, though it's funny when you say of yourself, I'm humble, but I will question myself to a fault. And I was like, well, maybe I'm wrong and maybe this is harmful to people. I don't want anything that's harmful to people. So I would go back and forth with that. But I was just like, I just hate this so much. And every time I would come across it, I would pray and fast
Hmm.
and pray and cry and be like, God, if this is true, just please convince me because I cannot bear this. I can't believe that I went 32. Well, it was probably more like 25 because after like 25, I was like, oh, screw you people. I was like, I'm going to believe what I believe. And, I was just like, gosh, the anyway, my repentance now is I've called every gay friend and just like said, I'm so heartily sorry for for everything.
Hmm.
And also I took my contribution from the church and started giving it to the Ali Forney Center in New York for
Hmm.
unhoused LGBTQ teens, and I'm going to start volunteering for them in January. That's my
Cool.
repentance, um, because I it is like a brick on my heart, um, and yeah. So there's more about that. That's one of the reasons I ended up leaving.
Hmm.
Um, which I don't know if you want to get to that now or
We can. I think that I just it's the thing that churches failed the most is this
oh,
area.
oh God.
And it's hard because it's like you think about conversion therapy and you think about all of this stuff and you think it's like these people are fighting against themselves. They're fighting against who
Yeah,
they are,
yeah,
but everyone around them is telling them who they are is wrong.
yeah.
Who they are doesn't make sense. Who they are
No.
is something that,
Who they are is disgusting.
yeah, and then the people that are in if they're in the church, they're not going to talk about it because I mean, it was jokes made about it in campus and in
Always.
all
Yeah.
this stuff and it was this thing of like, oh my gosh, but it's like the one place that it should be the safest for people to talk about
Yep.
anything should have been this place, but it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And we've ruined it. We've hurt a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um it's just yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to see and it's a lot to feel that like you had a part in it, even if
Yes. Yeah.
you weren't overtly like even though I wasn't overtly attacking or saying things, I didn't stop anything,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not trying to say this in like a virtue signaling kind of way. It's just an
Yeah.
honest
Yeah.
take because you're not in a system like this. If you're in a system like this for any length of time, you do perpetuate the cycle. You do perpetuate the system moving forward,
Absolutely.
whether or not you know it or not. And so,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I identify a lot with you in that thought because as I moved on and when I started working with kids is when I couldn't sit with that
Yeah.
either. There's a good book out there called Love is an Orientation by Andrew Marin, and
Mm-hmm.
he was a preacher. I believe he's a preacher, or no, he was just a member of a church, and like three of his friends came out to him in a year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's his like reconciling with things and
Mm-hmm.
what he started in the group in the church that he started out there in Chicago, and reading that book helped out a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
I've part of my repentance is also just reading um just everything by Christians in the LGBTQ community.
yeah,
And this is what I stand firmly on. Here's my thing. I have much more to say about this, but I do want to say this, which is, when in Acts, when Peter sees that God has given the Holy Spirit to the Gentiles, right? And he's like, well, who am I to say that, that they're not followers of Jesus? Now, obviously, they have the Holy Spirit, and who am I to speak against God? And that's what I felt like when I started meeting LGBTQ Christians. I was like, who are we to say that this person does not have the Holy Spirit when it's the fruits of the Spirit are so obvious in their life, you
yeah.
know?
Hmm.
And I stand on that. It's like, and I will stand on that to the end. It's like it is not remotely my place to tell anyone about their own life, you
Yeah.
know?
And I take it back to the people that's saying that the Bible was written by God. I
Yeah,
mean, you take, like I said before, the Bible wasn't. The Bible was written by people.
yeah.
And when you hear about homosexuality is a sin, again, you're listening to someone's idea
Mm-hmm.
of what is right or wrong in the context of what in the time and place that they were living.
Mm-hmm.
God didn't
Mm-hmm.
say that. A guy said it to a bunch of people out
Mm-hmm.
of for whatever reason and his
Mm-hmm.
interpretation. And then we're interpreting what he interpreted.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
you know, I can't sit here and say no, it's wrong because I don't believe it.
yeah,
I don't know that I ever did. I don't think I ever did believe that it was wrong.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and what's wrong about someone loving someone? What's wrong about someone living their life? What's wrong about that?
Well, a lot of people have a lot to say about what's
But
wrong
that's
with
just what I'm saying. Like how
that.
like
I know.
of all the hills that we can die on, this is the one we're
Honestly,
gonna die on, like
honestly.
something, because it's like, and people say the thing like, well, it ruins the traditional values of marriage. It's like I'm married, and the fact that
Yeah,
two of my friends are lesbians and they're married does not do anything to my marriage.
I
Like
know.
my
It's
marriage is my marriage, and their marriage is their marriage, and it's wonderful that they did that. And it's just like, and then, oh, I mean, we could go down,
we could go down this rabbit hole forever,
right?
but I mean, I did want to say that I actually, because like I said, I like to go straight to the people. So there was one person who was the voice of
Uh-huh,
of you know LGBTQ issues in the church,
uh-huh.
and so I made an appointment with that person to talk to him. Very nice man, tormented by a lot of people within the church and without the church. Really like him a lot. But when it came to uh, talk about a hill to die on, he was like, if part of the church believes that being gay is okay with God, the church needs to split. And I was like, this is, I was like, this is the hill that we're gonna, this is what we're
That's the
gonna,
answer.
this is what we're gonna die
We're
on.
gonna split apart, not talk about it.
No, we're not gonna talk because we don't allow any other views other than the patriarchal, hierarchical, patternistic view of the Bible. That's it.
Hmm.
And if you don't like that, go find another church, which is basically what happened to me when I was very upset when the
Mhm.
Portland church was ousted for saying that women could preach and lead,
Yeah. How
very
dare
close,
they?
very close to those people, right? How dare they, right?
How
So
dare
I,
they let a
so
woman preach? Oh,
right, right. So I went to the person. I was like, give me the name of the person who told them that. I didn't know this person from Adam, right?
yeah.
But as everything, ever our the people in our church are very kind in many ways. He was a very kind man in very many ways. But basically, I was like, we had an opportunity to show that we could have dissenting voices um, over matters that are just not. First of all, they're not. I don't think fundamental to not even in the church's definition of salvation issues. Even in that really strict version, this is not one of those things, right? We had an opportunity to open up a dialogue about something, and you nipped it in the bud. You told them, nope, we will not have that voice here, and he was like, well, I can understand if you need to find another church. And I was like, I've been
Yeah.
in this church for 32 years. I have served with my whole heart. And you're going to just be like, well, okay, our way or the highway. I think he meant it to be kind. Like, because, in the old days, you'd be like, you can't leave. So he meant it to be like, I understand. So be off with you, young woman. And I was like, so, like, okay, really? I'm that, I'm just that replaceable. We're just anybody who has a different thing is replaceable because we could just go out and baptize somebody else to
Yeah.
meet the
Hmm.
numbers. Um, yeah.
Well,
So
it's really funny with the church and uncomfortable issues. I feel like I should maybe not, but issues that make people feel uncomfortable. The
yeah,
first thing is there starts to be a pseudo dialogue about it.
yeah.
That
It's
this
not.
is
It's
kind of
not
the MO
really. It's not
of a
really a
lot of
dialogue.
churches. I remember like, because it was a few years ago, you would see how like I follow a couple of the ICOC churches, and you would see how like this guy's coming to do a speaking on LGBTQIA plus people
Hmm.
and God. And you're like, oh, that's cool. But it was really never like the only thing that starts to say is like it's either you say things like remember that they're people and this you don't hate the sin, you don't hate the
Hate the
person, you
sinner.
hate the sin, right?
Right. Right.
And then they start to say how like there's identifying and then there's acting on it
Yeah.
and that kind of thing, which is still destructive. It's still
Oh yeah.
telling the people that it's wrong because there's people that are a part of churches that are of that and they just choose to be alone the rest of their life. They're like,
I
this
know.
is how I'm designed, and so I don't get to do this, but my reward will be in heaven. And then I'm just like, I'm heartbroken by that because I'm like,
Yeah.
that's of all the things, the creator of everything, this is the best we can do,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And then
Enforced
you start to,
celibacy. Yep.
and then the people that disagree get the feeling it goes back to what I was saying about how we use the Bible and like the view of persecution. And they start to feel persecuted and that like they're being attacked because of their beliefs.
Yeah.
I remember there was that commercial that came out a few years ago when like it was in response to something and it was all these like really pretty, like cool, hip, like 20 somethings.
Hmm.
And they were like saying about they were like talking about how like I just feel that this is, they were like sharing. I wish I knew I'm gonna butcher this commercial, but it basically was like Christians saying how like I don't feel that I can say this or I don't feel like I can say that. And you're like, what is this going to be about? And then at the end of the commercial, it's like, I mean, because I believe that marriage is a man and a woman. And it
Yeah.
was all to like be like, woe is you for your beliefs. And I'm just like, fuck.
Yeah.
That's it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you insert the idea of women roles in church. And I mean, you want to get an old white man uncomfortable, talk about women leading or talk about
Yeah. Yeah.
homosexuality, and they lose their minds.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the church, the Bible is very patriarchal. I know that people object to me saying that. All I mean is that it's written, every single piece of it is written in times when patriarchy was a given, you know?
It was written
So,
in a totally different place too.
yeah. Yeah.
And culturally things were different. I mean,
Culturally, yep.
even the act of sex was viewed in a different way than we view it.
Oh yeah.
It was
Wives were property. That's the
yes.
biblical, right? You talk about a biblical marriage. Let's talk about the fact that
Yeah.
wives were property from beginning to end. And that,
And it's
that
yeah.
Paul, when he talks about it, he actually is kind of progressive for, you know, for that
Yeah.
time in some ways, that their bodies belong to each other. That was hugely uh
Yeah.
progressive.
And sex was merely transactional. There was
Yes.
nothing it was just trans it was and it was interesting. There's a guy, Dan McKellen, who has
Oh,
a
I love Dan.
podcast, Data
Yeah.
Over Dogma, and
Data over dogma. Yeah.
he was talking about how sex was like the man had to be the giver,
Yeah.
and like the fact that like a man receiving from a man, it just doesn't compute
Does not
in like
compute.
that.
Yeah.
that person's frame of mind.
Yes.
Um,
And also the whole thing about who's on top, that I
oh
even
yeah.
like,
Hmm.
even having a woman on top was considered like, oh my God, the man's masculinity is now damaged because the woman was on top. And this is what we're going to use as our standard for
How
um
silly,
it's
right?
just, oh my God, it makes me nuts. It makes me nuts. But here's what I'll tell you. And
Okay.
I have the full blessing of my child. My son is gay.
Uh-huh.
He came out to me, and that was the beginning of the end. The beginning of the end was the way the church treated everything post George Floyd. I was devastated by how badly
Yeah,
that was handled. And then the whole thing with, the Portland church, where I was just like, I think I'm done. And then my son came out and I'm like, now I'm done. There is no fucking
hmm,
way that this church is going to get between me and my child. I get emotional about this because
sure.
I've seen this happen to families across time, across my time in the church, and cried every single time. And it's almost like God's little irony that my my son is gay. He was like, go talk to him, mom, tell him, and I was like, you will not get between me and my children.
Sure.
You will not. Every single bit of my mama bear thing came out. And even if it was God Himself that was trying to come between me and my children, well, guess what? Send me to hell then. Because I will not treat my children like there's something broken
Yeah.
in them. No way.
Hmm.
No way.
Yeah. And that's what you should do as a parent, you know? See your
Yeah.
kids for who they are, as they are,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think about that with my kid, what it would be like being in that church and it's what keeps me away from it. My kid's
Hmm.
so little, we're not even there yet. But
Yeah.
it's like you think about how people are treated and how that's viewed, things are viewed, and
Yeah.
oh, it's scary. It's intense. I mean, having kids changes everything,
It
how you
does.
view everything.
Hmm.
So, again, the question, because you were in it for 30 years, why? Why stay? With all of this that you're feeling, all of this that you're experiencing, all of your viewpoint,
Yep.
why stay in it? What was it that was keeping you in it that was giving
Yep.
you life?
Um, the people. I really loved the people individually.
Hmm.
I do respect and love the
Hmm.
Bible. Most of it, read in context, read, with when it's interpreted, um, well,
Yeah.
uh, uh, habit. Um, my husband's still part of the church, and I honestly respect him for that because he's gone through hell in many ways, and he's really trying to make a difference. He's really brought a lot of mental health counseling to um, the church, and I really respect him for what he's doing. Um, the answer ultimately is my sense of autonomy. Like I didn't feel like I had the right to
Mm,
leave, or the um, or that I never felt like I could leave. Isn't that crazy? Because then I
no.
would be giving up on God, or giving up on the people, or giving up on helping, or giving up on it's a mystery to me in some ways. And
Yeah.
I'm a words person, but this one I can't quite I'm not sure what the words were. It just suddenly occurred to me that I could leave if I wanted to. And
Hmm.
I'm not sure that ever really occurred to me before. I know that sounds nuts,
No, it
but
doesn't sound nuts. It doesn't sound nuts at all. When you're in it and you're in something like this is your world now.
yeah,
This is your life, your love, your support system, your everything. Did you meet your husband in the church?
yep,
See? So then it was what brought you your husband. It was what brought you your friends. It
my
was your
children.
community.
Yeah,
You begin to orient everything in your life around this.
yeah,
So what is the alternative?
yeah,
Because when you're in it, we're sold and manipulated through how we're talked to about what it's going to be like if you leave, what friendships are going to be like, what your marriage is
yeah,
going to be like, what your kids are going to be like. And
yeah.
then eventually, and then you're leaving and you're going to hell. Leaving this is going to hell. And
Hmm.
cults do this, churches do this,
Hmm.
any
Hmm.
kind of high demand system will get you to not think about what's going on over here. You need to
Yeah,
focus here. And it's and people can argue that it's a small-minded person, and I'm like, fuck that, it's not.
yeah,
Your entire life is now this.
yeah,
So no, you're not crazy. It wasn't a crazy thing. It's not nuts. It
yeah.
is what it is. I felt it. I didn't have a choice in feeling it. My entire world was based. I
Right.
built my world.
And also you grew up in it. So you didn't
Yeah.
have even another,
Hmm.
you didn't have another worldview. That was the
Yeah.
worldview. That's the world. That was what life is. That's
Hmm.
reality for you. And yeah, and I put myself, I was so determined to serve God that I
Yeah.
made that my reality and made that my worldview because I thought that's what God wanted.
Sure.
I guess ultimately that's what it is. And I finally felt the sense, when Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, I finally was like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, I can't do this anymore. I mean, I got sick. I was having heart issues. Um, and I think it's just like the prolonged stress and the prolonged sadness. So sad in so many ways.
Hmm.
Just so heartbroken in so many ways. You know, with all of the good, and there was so much good. There was so much good. The price of it was more than I ultimately could pay. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
so
Yeah.
you know,
So what was it like after you left? Because how long have you been out?
well, I've been out. Well, I about a year and a half ago, I said I was taking a sabbatical. Um,
Hmm.
and you know, I I don't object to still calling it that because you just never know what life is gonna, you just never know what life is gonna hand you
Yeah.
ultimately. But uh, the first thing I did was I started reading a lot of spiritual pornography, like all the writers that talked about, the Bible not being a pattern, not being a manual for
Yeah.
life.
Mhm.
I started reading all of those. I'm telling you, I said this to, there's a writer, Pete Enns, um, and he wrote
Yeah,
The
is he
Sin
the
of,
guy that is the Bible for normal
yes,
people?
love
Hmm.
him to death. But honestly, he saved my spiritual sanity. Somebody who is a believer,
Yeah.
who could still look at it, with the analytical eye, the critical
Hmm.
thinking eye. And that's what I longed for all those years. And so I read, oh my gosh, I read Pete Enns, I read Rachel Held Evans, I read Diana Butler Bass. David Gushee, Thomas J. Ord, Richard Rohr, Brian McLaren, everything that I could get that would offer me a perspective so that I could understand what my emotions were telling me. Um, and it 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 was such a profound sense of relief that it's hard to express,
Hmm.
you know, and traced through with sadness because it's there's a certain there's a certain security that comes from thinking that you have all the answers, right? You have all the answers because you have the Bible and you can help anybody at any time with anything. And, I'm arrogant enough to be like, I like that. I like being able to tell everybody what to think and what to feel, I'll be honest about that. Um,
Yeah.
and so there's a trace of sadness that comes through with the sense of like, I, I don't really know anything, which is both incredibly relieving and a little sad. Um, you know, um, but my husband has been very supportive for somebody who's still going. It's remarkable actually to me, how supportive he's been. And when I told the leaders in my sector that I was leaving, I was like, this has nothing to do with you as people. You've been wonderful, and they really were. Um, I said, but I just don't believe this anymore. I don't believe that women can't lead. I don't believe that we can't talk about white supremacy, which is so obvious in every single thing that we do,
Hmm.
and we can't talk about it, right? And I absolutely do not believe that I will ever teach anyone that being gay is a sin, and therefore I cannot be in this ministry because I cannot subscribe to any of that anymore. And I'm really sorry,
Yeah.
but it's just, I suddenly was like, I can say no. I can say no, and I say no. Um, and I take all the circumstances. I take all the consequences of that, which is a relief. It's like,
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. I don't care. I'm exercising the autonomy that God has given me to say no,
Hmm.
and that is incredibly um, powerful.
Yeah, I wish that more people knew they could say no.
I
I
know.
wish I could have I wish I could have known I could say no earlier than I did.
Me too.
Um, I think that's important for people that are in positions of confusion and hurt in this is the idea that no, you can say no and you can think differently.
Hmm.
And there's a big wide world out there, with regards to like thought in Christianity and stuff. I mean, there's countless books for me as well that have helped. I think, you know, Rob
Yeah.
Bell showed me there was a door,
Yeah.
and like like Richard Rohr and Eckhart Tolle and Ram Dass like gave me the
Hmm.
strength to walk through the
To
door,
walk through it. Yeah.
and then once I was out that door, it was like, oh my gosh. Oh,
Yeah. It's crazy, right? It's like a spell is broken.
yeah. And I think that like for people that leave, I think reading is important and like understanding because especially if you were in it as long as you were and as long as I have, I mean, knowing like taking the time to like see other perspectives, I think is important.
Yeah.
Um, but what would you tell someone who's left or who's leaving that like that you felt helped you that you might think could help them?
Um, I would say be very, very, very patient with yourself,
Hmm.
um, because it's traumatizing in
Hmm.
in many ways. I've visited other churches since since I left. In the first church that I went to, I just stopped um, through the entire service because it was just so, it's like getting divorced.
Yeah.
Um, so be patient with yourself and be honest that, like, listen, if we're not allowed to grow and change, then what good is it? I couldn't stay in that static place. No, nobody should have to stay in that static place of, like, apologetics. It's like, this is what I believe and I won't budge from it. And I don't care. You can give me like 10,000 things of reality outside of that, and I will not budge. And Christianity in general, like, rewards that, right?
Hmm.
That's the faithful person. But I think that's Christianity. I don't think that's Jesus, because Jesus, like, really messed around with a lot of the scriptures from the Hebrew scriptures. Like, he really, like, messed with them. He had theological imagination. That's what I think. Uh,
Hmm.
he was able to look at stuff and be like, what's the heart of this? And that's not what that meant. And this, you've taken this sort of life manual approach to this, and that's not who God is. And then he says,
No.
God is, what is the most important command? To love God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And that is what I'm trying to do now. That's why I
Yeah.
left, you know. So if it's honest that you're really looking for truth and this is part of your journey, then I think God applauds that. Who knows? I could be wrong, you know, but
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I don't have to be certain about anything anymore. And I'm so grateful for that.
Glad,
Postmodernism.
yeah.
Just
I'm
kidding. Just
glad you
kidding.
said that. I'm glad you said that about not being certain because that was like one of the first things that went away was
Yeah.
my feeling of not being certain because I don't
Yeah.
think we're never going to really know.
No.
And I think for me, the search for that is what's more important than actually the finding it out,
Yeah.
you know? And when I'm in the search, when I'm digging into this is that's when the transformations are happening for me
Yeah.
in light bulbs.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I consider myself a Christian agnostic right now.
yeah.
It's like, I love Jesus, and I everything else is up for grabs, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I like that. More flexibility, more expansiveness, you know.
Yeah.
We don't need to have more like hills to die on, you
No.
know, more
Nope.
constrictive things.
My only hill to die on these days is, am I loving someone as I love myself?
Mhm.
That's it.
I like it.
Yeah.
What do you think? We were in a
Hmm.
cult?
Well, I'm laughing. I'm thinking about Nadine's thing. If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck. Uh, I would say that that's a buzzword. So I think it's a
Hmm.
tricky word.
Yeah.
Um, do we fit the bite model of coercive control, behavior, information, thought, and emotion control? Hell yeah. But that's the organization. That's the that was the way that the organization was set up. Do I believe
Mm.
that people within that organization are not in a cult? Absolutely. I think some people, it's just genuine. Um, and I don't think they're in a cult. And I think there's not, and they think there's some leaders who are not cult leaders and lots who are. Um, so I don't, high control, uh, high expectations, yes. Cult, I just don't know if I know what that word means precisely. But
Gotcha.
for me, ultimately, I think it was. For other people, I couldn't say.
Got it. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for sharing your story.
Roy, thank you so much. You've been wonderful. And I hope that I can go on and on.
Mhm.
And I know this was really long. I'm sorry. But it was really healing to me. So
Good.
I really, really appreciate it. And you're wonderful
Oh,
the way
I
that you
appreciate you
handle
saying
things.
that.
So
You're you're wonderful as well. I think there's strength and it's in sharing this and power in sharing this. So it was amazing. Thank you for letting me add this to the growing conversation that it is.
thank you, Roy. And also one caveat. I know
Yeah,
for some people that cursing kind of like they turn off the minute they hear somebody uh, cursing. I know some people who would be like, "Oh, I can't take you seriously because
yeah.
you
Hmm.
cursed," and that's your prerogative. But sometimes the emotion just like comes up, and I can't express it any other way. So
Yeah.
there you go. Well,
Well, I hope those people didn't turn it off and they were able to
yeah,
push through and listen to this whole thing. So
yeah.
cool.
Thank you so much, Roy. I
Yeah.
really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank all of you for listening out there and your support of this podcast. As always, you can help support the podcast by doing the simple thing of just liking, rating, and reviewing. Also, share this with your friends, share this on Instagram. All of that helps the podcast grow this conversation. And if you feel inclined, you can also support the podcast financially by donating to the GoFundMe, where you can find the link in the show notes or also in my Instagram page. If you or were a member or know someone who was a member of the ICOC, and they would like to share their story, you can contact me by email, Clemenz with a Z at gmail.com, or you can direct message me through Instagram at the Clemenz with a Z podcast Instagram page. All right, until next time, guys, remember, I'm just a channel, I'm not the source. Peace.